Hey everyone, me Kevin here. The chair of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Jerome Powell, spoke for about 55 minutes today. My goal is to summarize the most important parts of what he said as quickly as possible. Let's get started. So, Jerome Powell started off by saying, look, a strong labor market in our country helps heal damage from recessions, and it helps remove racial disparities. So it's very important for people to be able to share in a strong labor market. And Chairman Jerome Powell, in his opening statement, says that the problem right now is, our unemployment rate looks low, but it's actually too low, and we have more problems than it looks like right now. See, many have left the labor force to take care of their children who are distance learning, or they can't look for a job anymore because their skills have changed and aren't needed anymore, or maybe their skills haven't changed, but the needs for their skills have changed. And basically, Jerome Powell says that in January, there were 5 million people who said the pandemic prevented them from literally looking for work. And considering this, Jerome Powell thinks the actual unemployment rate in our country is closer to 10% right now. And he says unemployment rates for blacks are rising at a faster rate than they are for whites. Basically, Jerome Powell comes down and does the usual and says, Congress passing fiscal policy is essential to helping this. This is sort of a little kick in the butt here on the stimulus debate to go, let's see some stimulus. Come on, we need income replacement right now. Then he talks about inflation, and then we're going to get into, quite a few things here on interest rates and inflation, which can be very important. So regarding inflation, Jerome Powell says he looks at indicators like what wages are doing and what's happening with unemployment. Right now, he says wages aren't really going up, and obviously he started off by talking about really high actual unemployment. And both in the space of when he looks at employment and he looks at inflation indicators, he's not seeing inflation happening anytime soon. He says there are two things that can lead to a temporary boost in inflation, though. Those two things are the drop-off of March, April, and May data. That is, when we look at March, April, and May of last year, inflation was so low and such a trough that when we compare, we're going to have year-over-year inflation around that 3 to 4%. I'm injecting that 3 to 4% because when I do the math, that's what it comes out to. He didn't say that, but that's what he was referring to. Then he says, on top of that, we've had consistently and persistent low inflation over time. And even though once COVID's done and once this pandemic's over and people get vaccinated and we get back to normal, we go back to movie theaters and bars and AMC to the moon, right? Even when this happens, we might see a temporary boost in inflation because people all of a sudden are like opening their wallets again. But he doesn't actually expect anything to be persistent. That is, Jerome Powell is not expecting any kind of persistent inflation, and his plan is basically to ignore both of these instances of inflation rearing its head, so to speak, or popping up. So he believes that we're really a long way away from seeing inflation, and that there's this kind of weird nature of what's happening, that we have two things happening right now on top of like when inflation might rear itself. There are two big structural shifts he sees happening right now. One, he sees persistent inflation because of technological innovations. Technology tends to drive interest rates down, and I'll explain that in a moment because he talked about that in detail. It's kind of neat. And we have this low Phillips curve or flat Phillips curve relationship where basically when more people get a job and more people get employed, usually we expect wages to go up, and that drives inflation up. But both persistently low inflation and a lack of inflation happening when people get jobs are basically leading to low inflation. And Jerome Powell, he's reasonable here, and he says, look, things can change. He's basically saying we can be wrong at the Fed. But like all of what I just said here in the last, 2 minutes is basically Jerome Powell going, dude, we ain't seeing inflation, and here are the reasons why we're not seeing inflation. When we do temporarily see inflation, we don't think it's going to stay around for these reasons, and it is possible that we're going to be wrong, but we don't think we're going to be wrong because things like this don't change quickly. In fact, his words were, now things can change, but they're unlikely to change quickly. In other words, right now it doesn't look like we're going to have inflation. Things can change. We could be wrong. All of a sudden next year, who knows, maybe things will change. But based on our experience and our knowledge and history of economics, we don't think any kind of change like that is all of a sudden going to hit us upside the face. Basically, Jerome's saying we're not seeing inflation, and we don't think all of a sudden we're going to wake up one day and get clapped and go, oh my God, there's inflation. So his belief is that instead, right now, the Federal Reserve needs to focus on the base case. And the base case, sort of the economic outcome, they have sort of a bear case, a base case, and a bull case, like bad, medium, good. So his base case or medium case is bad. So he thinks the base case, his phrase was, the base case right now for us is towards the downside. So he says, we're not going to change anything. We're not going to raise rates. We're going to keep buying bonds, $80 billion in treasury, and $40 billion in mortgage-backed securities. So a nice bottom line here of like the last 6 minutes here is they ain't changing anything. They don't think inflation is coming. They are going to stick their heads in the sand, even though that's not really what they're doing. That's kind of what they're implying. It's like, don't care. Don't care if you see a little bit of inflation. We're good. We're just going to keep assuming there's no inflation. That's the Fed's point of view here. Super overly simplified in like 2 sentences, right? Then he's asked about, well, what about the federal debt? I mean, the debt, like, it's so high. Like, how is this sustainable? He's argued this before in other lectures, and he briefly summarized this and says, look, the level of debt is not unsustainable, aka we could keep paying the interest on this. Interest rates are so low, it doesn't really matter. At some point in the future, we'll have to pay off our debt, but not right now because the economy is weak and there are too many people unemployed. He says that time will come, but that time is not now and it's not close. Now, here's an interesting explanation he gave on why interest rates stay low right now. And this was a fascinating argument. I appreciated this one. So he says, as technology becomes more powerful, we end up having to spend less money on investments. And so I always try to think of analogies. Like sometimes I think of really stupid analogies. Sometimes I like my analogies. I don't know what you're going to get. So let's make up one right here. Let's say I want to create an online business. 10 years ago, I would use like WordPress, and I would have to be pretty good if I was using WordPress.org. Even .com had some things, but anyway, WordPress.org, I had to be pretty knowledgeable about like C++, codes, plugins, responsive web pages were all the rage 10 years ago, and like, oh, what's that? How do I get that to work? Like, it was intense. So starting up a business meant, you know, figuring out how to get your DBA, your corporation, your website set up, and you're spending, you know, a lot of money and a lot of hours doing all this stuff. Today, there are companies where you literally go, yo, I want to start a business. And they're like, cool, we'll get back to you in 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, here's your corporation, here's your DBA, here's your website, here's your business cards, here's your flyers, here's this, here's a loan, here's a bank account, here's a checkbook. And it's literally like, thanks. Part of that is because technology has become better, right? Like it's easy now to go to square.com or I think it's squareup.com. I think they both redirect to the same thing though. Or go to Shopify and create an online store. Like you could probably make an online store in the time it took you to watch this video. Jerome Powell says, as technology becomes more powerful, it takes us less money to spend on investments. Makes sense. The example I just gave literally reiterates that. So he says, as we need money less, interest rates actually go down because there's less of a demand for money. When there's more of a demand for money, interest rates go up. So in other words, this is a perfect explanation to show why technology is deflationary. Not only does technology itself, the more it becomes ubiquitous, do prices come down because it's easy for Shopify to go, hey, you could set up your business for $10 today. And then next month go, well, we'll do it for $9 this month because, you know, our servers just got 10% more powerful. Whatever, right? The point is, technology is deflationary from one point of view in that as technology becomes better, it costs less to actually create products and services. But also, as somebody who wants to invest and create a business, it takes you less money because things are now easier to do. So 2 reasons why technology is basically inflationary. So now, because of this, he says you actually reduce something known as the natural interest rate of a country. And that helps lower inflation expectations, because as the natural interest rate goes down and our expectations for interest rates go down, inflation expectations go down, and basically no inflation. It's so bizarro. It's crazy, but it's also fascinating at the same time. Then he's asked, hey, all right, if you were a senator or a congressperson, what would you do? Like, you're going to work today, what would you do as a congressperson? He says, problem is, and this is the first time he's actually really opened up about this, so I thought the question was brilliant. He goes, what we need is a unified national strategy. We need to take a step back and say, what can we do to maximize the productivity of our country? Then do that. Because as the productivity of everybody within the country goes up, everybody's condition and livelihood and standard of living goes up. And he says the problem now is we have high earners whose income has ballooned, has gone up like 500x. And you have low earners whose income has, on sort of an inflation-adjusted basis, stayed flat. In other words, flat income, big wedge going up for other income, K-shaped recovery, the usual that we keep hearing about. The rich get richer and the poor stay poor. And it's an interesting argument that he makes about, hey, let's have a national strategy and let's actually look back and go, wow, what can we do as a big master plan for the economy? It's interesting. I don't think it'll ever happen. But if you think about it, that's probably a better way to go at it than, all right, today we're fighting China and we're putting tariffs on China. Tomorrow we're doing the minimum wage. Now we're going to do solar panels, right? It's almost like Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell here is bagging on Congress for having such a narrow-minded view of, let's fix this. Okay, well, that broke that. Let's fix this. He's kind of like, take a step back. Look at the entire economy. What can you do to lift the entire economy up? Basically, like, this should be bipartisan. It shouldn't be that hard. Then he was asked if he has fun at his job. The answer kind of surprised me because every day, or anytime he gives a press conference, this doesn't seem congruent. But he says, I love my job. It's really fun. And he was totally sincere about that. Like, okay, hats off to you, Jerome. I think that's awesome. I mean, I enjoy economics. But here I am shortening a 55-minute interview down to less than 15 minutes. And I'm making analogies and trying to simplify things because your world doesn't sound that fun. But what do I know? Hey, cheers to you, man. I got myself a new cup of coffee and we'll keep chugging along over here and we'll keep listening. But now, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on this. Is Jerome Powell crazy? Is the big inflation coming? Or what's your take? Let me know. Consider subscribing, and folks, we'll see you in the next video.